Welcome to Brave Awareness. I'm Ronn Pawo McLane, meditation teacher, author, and poet, and someone who's done their fair share of surviving. This podcast isn't here to teach you how to fix yourself. It's here to remind you that you're not broken. These are spoken transmissions for modern minds, reflections, disruptions, and sacred interruptions. Let's begin. I want to start with something that's making some noise in trauma research right now. You've probably heard of the book, The Body Keeps the Score. It came out in 2014. It really changed the conversation around trauma and became one of the most widely read psychology books of the last 2 decades. Its core insight is that trauma is not just a mental event, but a physical one. That it shows up in the body in ways that cannot fully be healed through thinking alone. It resonated with millions of people who already knew this from the inside. But a new paper published this year is challenging that framing. Not the clinical insight, not the lived experience of trauma survivors, but the metaphor, the idea that the body literally stores trauma the way a hard drive stores data. What the new research proposes instead is that trauma is better understood as a disorder of prediction. The brain, after a traumatic experience, becomes stuck. It overweighs threat. It loses the flexibility to move between states. It keeps sending danger signals into the body even when the original danger is long gone. The body is not the archive of the trauma. It's the messenger carrying the brain's outdated prediction. And here's what struck me when I read about this. The body as messenger rather than archive. That is actually more precise than the original metaphor. And it explains something that 40 years of sitting with my own nervous system has shown me over and over again. The body knows before you do. Not because it's storing something, because it is receiving a signal your conscious mind has not yet caught up to. The tightness in your chest before you've named even what is wrong. The way your jaw clenches in a conversation that seems fine on the surface. The exhaustion that arrives before the grief does. The restlessness that showed up before the anxiety announces itself. That is not the past living in your tissue. That is your nervous system reading the present moment faster than your thinking mind can process it. And it's trying to tell you something. The practice, any practice worth the name, has to start with learning to heal that signal. We have been taught, in most of the Western traditions that have shaped modern psychology, to trust the mind over the body, to treat felt sense as something to be interpreted and corrected by rational thought, to distrust the body's signals as primitive, reactive, and unreliable. That is exactly backwards. The body's nervous system processes information faster than conscious thought by a significant margin. When you walk into a room and something feels off, your nervous system has already assessed dozens of signals, micro-expressions, spatial dynamics, tone of voice, subtle changes in the air quality, before your thinking mind has had a chance to form a single sentence about what is happening. The felt sense arrives first. The story comes after. And here's what this means for this practice. When you feel something in your body before you know why, that is not noise. That is data. Your nervous system is doing its job. The question is not whether to trust the signal. The question is how to read it accurately without immediately collapsing into a story that may or may not be true, because the signal itself is almost always accurate. The interpretation is where we get into trouble. Your chest tightens, that's real. That is information. Whether it means I'm in danger, or I care deeply about this, or something here reminds me of something old, that is the story your mind adds. And sometimes the story is right. And sometimes the story is a 10-year-old response to a present moment situation. The practice teaches you to notice the signal without immediately fusing with the story, to feel the tightness and ask, honestly, curiously, without already knowing the answer, what this is actually about. The new research uses a word I find genuinely useful: metastability. In plain language, it means flexibility. A healthy nervous system can move fluidly between states, between vigilance and rest, between focus and openness, between engagement and stillness. It reads the situation and shifts accordingly. It is not stuck. What trauma does, and this is where the new framework lands in exactly the same place as the clinical experience it was supposedly challenging, is narrow that flexibility. Let me say that again. What the trauma does is narrow that flexibility. The nervous system becomes organized around threat detection. It loses the range of motion it once had. It defeats to a narrow band of responses regardless of what the present moment actually calls for. This is why someone who has experienced significant trauma can walk into a perfectly safe situation and feel the full activation of danger. Not because they're irrational, not because the past is literally stored in the body, because their nervous system has been calibrated by experience to weigh the threat signal very heavily. And it's doing its job. It's just doing it from an outdated map. And here's what this means for your practice. The goal is not to eliminate the body's signals. The goal is to restore flexibility, to expand the range of motion, to give the nervous system enough safety and enough practice that it can begin to update its map, to move again between states rather than being organized permanently around one of them. That's what meditation does, what somatic practice does, what conscious breathing does, what any practice worth calling a practice is actually trying to accomplish. Not quieting the body, but freeing it. I want to address something directly that I hear often from people who come into this practice with a strong intellectual background. They understand the framework. They can articulate the theory. They know why they react the way they do. They have done the cognitive work, read the books, talked it through in therapy, and still cannot stop the reaction when it comes. And they blame themselves for that, as if understanding something should be enough to change it. But you cannot think your way out of a felt sense response. Not because you're weak or undisciplined or not trying hard enough. Because the signal arrives in the body before the thinking mind has had a chance to even intervene. By the time you have a thought about what is happening, the nervous system has already made its move. This is what we talked about in episode 4, the gap between understanding and integration. Understanding lives in the mind. Integration has to happen in the body. And integration takes repetition, practice, and time. There is absolutely no shortcut through it. What actually works when the body is running the show is not argument. It's not logic. It's not reminding yourself of what you know. What works is meeting the body where it is. Breath, grounding, physical movement, sensory contact with the present moment. Something that speaks directly to the nervous system in the language it actually understands, which is not words. The thinking mind can observe what's happening. It can name it. It can bring curiosity rather than judgment to the signal, but it cannot override the signal through force of will. And trying to do so usually makes the activation worse because now you are adding the stress of fighting yourself on top of the original stress. 40 years of sitting practice has taught me many things, but the most consistently humbling and the most consistently useful has been this. The body is always telling the truth about what is actually happening right now. Not what happened before, not what might happen next. What is actually present in this moment. The mind can construct elaborate stories about the past and the future. The body can only report the present, which means when you learn to read your body, not to control it, not to manage its signals into something more comfortable, but to actually listen to what it's saying, you have access to something the thinking mind cannot give you. And that is present moment truth. The tightness is here now. The ease is here now. The heaviness is here now. And from that honest present moment reading, something becomes possible that is not possible from inside a story about the past or a projection about the future. An actual response, rather than a reaction to something that may not be happening anymore. This week I want to give you one simple practice that does not require a cushion, a quiet room, or a particular time of day. It's called a body check, and it takes about 60 seconds. At any point during your day, before a difficult conversation, after a hard moment, in the middle of something that feels off without you knowing why, I want you to pause. Take one slow breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. Then ask 3 questions. Where am I holding tension right now? What is the quality of my breath? What is the overall feeling in my body? Not the story about why, just the sensation itself. You're not trying to fix what you find. You're not trying to relax it or resolve it or understand it. You're just making contact with what is actually present in this moment. That contact is the beginning of the practice. Not the destination, the beginning. Because you cannot work with something you cannot feel first. And you cannot feel something you have trained yourself to override. The body check is simply the practice of stopping the override long enough to listen. Now the debate about whether the body keeps the score or the brain does will continue. That's what science does, and it is good that it does. But here's what I know from the inside of 40 years of practice that no paper has yet managed to refute. The body knows before you do. It's not your enemy. It's not your obstacle. It is the most immediate and honest teacher you have access to. And every moment you spend learning its language, rather than trying to silence it or override it or think your way past it, is a moment the practice is actually working. Start there. Everything builds from there. Next week, we go somewhere that I think will bring a lot of what we have been building this season into very clear focus. We are going to talk about grief. Not the kind that gets casseroles, the kind that does not have a name. For now, eyes open, compass steady. That's enough for today. If this opened something for you, stay close. You can subscribe, share it, or just sit with what stirred. Brave awareness isn't a destination, it's a return. I'll meet you there again soon.